Dropped it down and caught him one. Daggone good too. There he is, bro. God, that's a big one. Oh, he's gonna get me in the post. Throw it up there, man. Throw it up there. That's a big one. Oh, he broke me off. Throw it up there. Goodness gracious. I'm gonna give you a rundown on something I've been learning while I've been saltwater fishing about fishing line. I learned this like a couple years ago, but now it's kind of more telling the story, kind of confirming what I've already believed about fluorocarbon versus monofilament. Fishing in saltwater has confirmed something about fishing line that I kind of already had a feeling about. I'm gonna tell you about it. Fluorocarbon, that's by far sold as the premium product to use, especially when you're talking about spinning gear, finesse gear. When I'm saltwater fishing, I almost always use spinning gear. And Braid to fluorocarbon setup, typically, right? Well, what I've started doing is using a braid to monofilament combo. Here's why. A lot of the fishing that I'm doing right now is fishing around docks.
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's strong. Strong as crap. And these docks have what's called barnacles around them. Yep. Barnacles are like literally like razor blades on the pilings of the docks. So what'll happen is you'll pitch towards the dock, you're working your bait back, working it back, fish grabs it. The first thing he decides to do is go fugitive on you and run under the dock and rub your line against the barnacles on the docks. What makes a dock really good is the fact that you got barnacles on the docks because that holds the bait fish, as well as on the ground or on the bottom of the lake under the dock. Anytime you have an oyster bar or any kind of inconsistency on the bottom, usually that's oysters where I live. So you're putting your line at jeopardy every time you fish. He's either going to take you in the barnacles on the post, and or when you're fishing the bait, you're either breaking off a lot because your bait's, you got to keep bottom contact, obviously. So that bait is constantly in contact with the oyster bar. And I've noticed that when I use fluorocarbon, even though we've sold it as the premium product, as you know, the line that does not break off, is stronger, there's no stretch, it's 100% material, there's no airspace, we sold it as invisible. What I've noticed is when I use fluorocarbon, fishing around that structure, is I break off way faster. That's a big one. Oh, he broke me off. Fluorocarbon can't take a nick. You've noticed that even if you've thrown a backlash before in fluorocarbon on your bait casters, you go to throw it, you throw it off, your bait keeps singing. It can't take even like just folded. You can really compromise fluorocarbon just by putting like a 90-degree angle in the line by folding it like that. It's compromised. So I started using a braid to monofilament setup. Right now I'm tying on 20-pound monofilament to my 20-pound braided line leader. I have started fishing, what? Okay, go ahead and get on the rod and go look at it. What I've learned is fluorocarbon doesn't seem to perform as well around the oyster bars and all the barnacles that you'll have around the docks and just the oyster bars that you actually end up fishing. So I ended up starting to fish more mono because the mono doesn't break off nearly as bad and all of that jagged structure that you got to be fishing when you come down here, because you're always going to be fishing either around docks with barnacles, or you're going to be fishing around oyster bars. So I use 20-pound tests, 20-pound test mono. The braid to monofilament setup, even though I'm sacrificing a little bit of my hook setting power because you obviously have some sponginess with monofilament, you know, it's got more stretch in it. That's what I mean by sponginess. It does not break off nearly as bad in the oysters. It doesn't break off nearly as bad on the dock pilings and the barnacles on the dock pilings. Dude, he's like, throw your rod over my head. Throw your rod over my head, please.
got him, bros. Yeah, I got it. He went in another? Yeah, I got it.
You got one, Daddy.
And so the braid to monofilament setup has been far more productive for me when I'm fishing in heavy structure. And I can't wait to apply that to my bass fishing, because we're just, right now, you just tie on braid to fluorocarbon, 6, 8, 10, 12 pound test, and you go at it, right? But I have found in certain situations that this works better. This is what I've been doing. Anytime I'm fishing for redfish, redfish are notorious for throw your bait up under there. These fish don't bite. They take your bait, woo, under the dock, going the other way, right? Well, what I've started to do is, obviously you have to upsize your line. 10, 12 pound test fluorocarbon or mono just ain't gonna get it done. So what I've been doing, this right here is my 20 pound test monofilament. This is, I've been hanging around the saltwater guys, so I've been using some of their equipment as obviously some of the stuff that I take to bass as well. This is Memory's high catch nylon monofilament. It's worked really good. 20 pound test mono. When I'm fishing around redfish, shallower structure, barnacles, oysters, I'm gonna go 15 pound test braid. This is my setup. I literally just grabbed this out of my boat. I go 15 pound test braid. I'm gonna throw my fishing line down. And then I'll go down to an Alberto knot for my line to line union. And then I'll come down to this 20 pound test monofilament, because 26 to 30 inch redfish, he is not playing. He's gonna get out of here when he realizes he's hooked. So 20 pound test, and that sounds heavy because I'm only using like 3 16th ounce jig heads and swim baits, stuff that I already use in bass fishing anyway, maybe a little funkier colors just because you can, but they'll bite the same colors that you use in bass fishing, right? That's gonna be my setup, all right? So if I'm fishing for trout, which is more of a finesse style of fishing, typically trout aren't in as heavy a structure. It's more about current and oyster bars on drops. So little shelves where it's 2 foot, 2 foot, and it drops off 6, 7, 8 foot really quickly. Heavy current.
That's exactly where I cast and got my oysters.
It's typically the deal there. So it's more open water fishing. So it's more of a finesse style. It's more like bass fishing. Trout is more like a finesse style of bass fishing. I use my Signature Series rod, the favorite 7-1 6 stick, and I use it just a little bit lighter. If it's a lot of oyster bars, I'll still use mono, but I'll go down to, this is my 10 pound test. I'll use 10 pound test mono, same thing, 15 pound test braid, 2 or 3,000 series reel to 10 pound test mono, all right? But if I'm in some heavy structure, you know, like big oyster bars in shallower water, then I'll upsize that, because obviously you're gonna hang more. But the deeper I need to get my bait down, the smaller I'll go on my monofilament. Sometimes I find my trout on just straight up current breaks with no oyster bars at all. That's when I'll go back to my straight up fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon works really good because the fact that it sinks, and you are able to keep your bait down on the bottom a little bit better. So just to recap, red fishing, heavy structure, oyster bars, barnacles, you're going in the jungle, you're going after them, 15 pound test braid to 20 pound test mono. I promise you're gonna be a lot better satisfied with how this setup works up. But if you find yourself fishing a little bit more open water for trout, go with 15 pound test braid to a 10 pound test monofilament. That's gonna get you through. You don't need quite as heavy a line for trout. And typically they're in not nearly as heavier structure. And if you're just in an all out just current situation where there's really nothing to hang in, go with your fluorocarbon. 12 pound test fluorocarbon is gonna keep your bait on the bottom a little bit better. Not saying you shouldn't use fluorocarbon. What I've noticed is that mono performs a lot better anytime you're around oysters and barnacles. So that's my saltwater setup. And just because I use it in saltwater doesn't mean I won't be using it in fresh this year, because if I can get one extra fish in the boat, that's a lot of money on the line. That'd be it.